Good evening and welcome to Monday Night Fitba. We are making it up a wee bit as we go along because we've got a guest booked, but it's not quite happened for us yet. So we're leaving our options open, and this is going to be a wee bit freeform jazz. So what we're going to do first is kick straight off with intros, obviously, and then go on to cover the Hibs game, because a resident Hibbies have deserted us again, and we may not have a huge amount to say about it, because my mum always told me if you've nothing nice to say, don't say anything at all. So what I've noticed during the week is I don't introduce myself enough. So my name is Sam. I'm your host for the evening. Joining me is Ross. Say hello, Ross.
Hello, Ross.
And Scott.
Hello. Is this us trying to pad out the show to an hour?
No, really.
Introducing ourselves.
I want people to be able to label their criticisms properly, so we know who is the hate figure, the genuine hate figure.
They seem to know me and Connor on Kickback anyway.
That is true, aye. Mikey gets love on Kickback, which still throws me off every time. But yeah, right, so let's move on to the Hibs game. Ross, what do you have to say about the Hibs result?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I've been a bit outspoken of them getting a bit ahead of themselves and stuff over the past couple of weeks. I got stick for it. I mean, they are a proven team, but as I've always said, they're going to be speed bumps along the way, and that was one of those. Apparently, they didn't deserve to get beat from different sources. Scott here has watched the highlights of the game.
So have I have to say what highlights there were at least.
Exactly. So it'll be good to hear as to how everything went down. But Falkirk are no mugs. I mean, if they're going to win at their own ground against Hibs, we got a good result away to them. I don't see them repeating it again at Easter Road, but I'll credit to them. I mean, it's kind of showed up the gap a little bit in the middle, because Raith Rovers, obviously, as well, they've all seen they got beat as well, and Queen of South, obviously, we pumped them. So there you go.
Right, Scott, let's get into the nitty gritty of the 2.5 minutes worth of highlights that we've actually seen then. There was almost as much coverage of the teams coming out and lining up there was of the actual action in the game. Ross is right in that everyone has said Hibs didn't deserve to lose, but equally everyone has said Hibs didn't deserve to win. That it had 0-0 written all over it and one lapse in concentration. Let's start with a goal. I thought from a defensive perspective, the goal was poor, to say the least, given that firstly Hanlon wins the first header, but it goes nowhere. It's a pretty poor defensive header. He's put off, and to be fair, he gets something on it, but there is a complete lack of a midfield to screen in front of him. I mean, McCracken is in 5 yards of space, and they all rush to him, but the reason they have to rush so much is because he was in so much space to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say that the midfield has become a bit of a problem for Hibs, a little bit on the defensive side, but also offensively, especially with Malonga now joining El Alagui and sort of being in the stands for a few weeks. They need some of these younger guys, and guys like Liam Craig, to start sort of performing consistently and adding more to their game. Scott Allen's a great player, but I think even he'll admit that he needs to add goals to his game. And then you've obviously got guys like Stanton and Harris, who, I mean, Stanton is getting raved about in the under-20s, but he got given his chance on Saturday, and didn't see much in the highlights, but obviously for what I read in the papers and on the .net, there didn't seem to be much of a performance coming in for the first team.
You brought Scott Allen up there. It's been noticeable over the last few weeks that Allen is really the one that sticks out, that no one has a bad word to say about him, and in actual fact everyone is really bigging him up. Even the former professionals that we've been able to interview on the show, every one of them, when they talk about Hibs, Scott Allen is singled out for praise. Is there a danger that he, especially in the absence of McGeoch at the minute, is there a danger that he's actually becoming too much of a talisman, especially for someone who is still so relatively unproven and young?
Yeah, and obviously because he gets so much press attention, it's obviously going to mean that opposition teams are going to be looking more closely at him, and that's okay if you've got other players who can then come to the fore and get ahead of the game by the scruff of the neck. But because McGeoch's out injured just now, and because guys like Craig and that aren't really performing on a consistent basis, it means that once Craig's marked out of a game, they don't have anyone else to rely upon.
Ross, what do you think? Do other players need to step up and match Scott Allen, or is it just that at the moment there's no players good enough to really match his performance levels, and they are becoming too reliant on him?
It's a bit of both. I mean, I don't think there is players there that can match Allen. You know, that's not. Alan is a really good player. Definitely the best in their team. One of the best players in the league. They've got to really start seeing their younger players shine now, because there has been a lot of up and down performances from the youngsters, and that's fine. You know, they're youngsters. We've had the same problem over past seasons. Last season we had to stick with them, and that's what made them better players this season.
Yeah.
Hibs are now looking more likely to they'll finish in the playoffs, I think. 19 points now is, I don't see them picking that back up. So it's all about preparing them for the playoff games, and I think they need to start bringing in a strong 11 now. So if they're playing Danny Handley 1 week, they need to stick with him in that position. They've changed the shape quite a lot. Hearts have done that as well, but it just doesn't seem to work under Stubbs.
I know what you mean in that, and that sometimes, especially if it's not working, we have to be careful here, and we will go on to discuss this in context of the positive run that Hibs have been on of late.
Yeah.
But I agree with you to a certain extent, particularly in the midfield. I think Scott touched on it, the fact that there's a lot of chopping and changing in there, even when things are working, either because of injury or because someone's, like you say, maybe firing in the goals in the under-20s, so is brought in because he's seen as being a foreign player. It means that actually if you're changing it every week or every couple of weeks, people actually start to be less culpable. They're less responsible for their performances, because we've only played this position for 2 weeks. How can I be an expert at it? And it starts to that they just kind of blend into one, and you've got this midfield shaped problem rather than maybe one guy who's not quite at it, and in January we replace him. At the moment, I don't really know. Liam Craig dropped out at the weekend. Liam Craig for us was probably a problem before. It now looks, based on the weekend, that maybe he was more important the last few weeks than he was given credit for.
It's hard to say. Looking at their midfield, Scott Robertson and McGee are the only two that I think have got a position that I think they'll be given on a week to week basis. Alan tends to sort of drift around. He doesn't really play the number 10 role, but then he doesn't really lie deep and take the ball off the centre halves as well. So it's sometimes quite hard to pin down if that is a free role that he's been given by the manager, or whether he just sort of does things off his own back. Now you look at guys like Kennedy and Sinclair that have came in. Sinclair's hardly touched the ball. Kennedy's been in and out the team. It's clearly not worked, these two signings. Obviously January, if I was Stubbs, I'd definitely be looking at maybe bringing in a couple of more experienced wide men, even guys that have maybe played in this division before.
Need a striker as well. Unbelievable.
To be honest, watching Ian Russell play for Queen of the South, that is the type of guy Hibs could do to try and get them out of this league.
Yeah.
Somebody who they could get on relatively small wages, maybe even a small fee. That's definitely the road that they should possibly be taking in January, because it hasn't worked, this loan system, I'm afraid.
Okay, striking is an interesting one, because I remember about 3 weeks ago, maybe 4 weeks ago, and I have no desire to throw him under the bus, but I'm going to anyway. We had a conversation about Dominic Malonga, and Connor said he's been good, he's scored the goals, but he doesn't necessarily, his all-round play shouldn't necessarily mean that he's irreplaceable. They should be able to find a way to play a similar style of football without him, maybe with someone either replacing him or doing a slightly different role, but ultimately fitting into the team picture. We're now in a position where it seems like Malonga is a massive miss, and everything now goes back to El Alagui again. He now beat Malonga back, and it's, again, we're talking about talisman and being overly reliant on certain individuals within the group. At the weekend it felt like Paul Heffernan again, Jason Cummings, and then we saw the young lad Alan come on just to confuse us all. Is it vitally important that one of those guys steps up and takes on the burden of not just scoring the goals, but also leading the line and giving a presence up there?
I've still got confidence in Cummins as a player. I expected a wee bit more from him, especially after the Ibrox result, considering that was his kind of standout game. He has had standout performances in the past, but that was his kind of first man's role in a game, single-handedly, turning a game round. And since then, even in the derbies and stuff, it seems like the bigger games, I thought that his confidence would have been there to take them, score another few goals. but I'm not really sure he's scored that many goals since then.
Is there potentially a problem that you're asking Cummings, who I think is more of a Derek Riordan type, to do the Gary O'Connor job, and that there's now no number 9? You're asking a guy who actually likes to kind of play from wide and maybe score the odd wonder goal to then play as an out-and-out striker, because Heffernan, as we've discussed a million times, it's just not going to happen for him at Easter Road.
Yeah, and to be fair to Cummins, I don't think you can rely on him to take everything on his shoulders. He can't get you the goals and also look to bring others into the game.
Yeah.
That's just too much of an ask, regardless of the talent that he's undoubtedly shown, but he does show it in short bursts. I haven't seen him have a great 90 minutes, or even a sort of 2 or 3 sort of game spell where he seems to be stringing performances together. It is sort of coming sporadically with Cummins, so you do need to get one of the big guys back, regardless of who it is, whether Malonga goes away in January or not, but they are definitely going to have to look at that position.
Okay, let's bring the positives into the situation then, but I'm going to do so rather naughtily on an actual negative. There's a real thing for Hibs at the moment. I actually purposely try in this show not to focus on stats too much, because you can get the stats anywhere. If you want the stats, there are a million different places to go. Twitter is full of them. This show is about fan feeling, gut feeling about who's doing well, who do we like, who do we not like, what's working and what isn't. But it's been difficult to avoid the stats this weekend, because it's been all about Hibs' unbeaten run. 7 games unbeaten, 6 games unbeaten away from home, and they all ended. That's definitely been a positive, in that it's shown they've steadied the ship and they've learnt how not to lose games, albeit come unstuck a little bit of the weekend. I do think you can say, though, a freak last minute goal, still they were steady throughout the 90 minutes. How big a concern is it that they've managed to go through a real consistent unbeaten run, and as we said a wee bit earlier, all they've really done is consolidate their place in the top 4?
Yeah, it's a strange one, because I look at the Hibs team and there is definite improvement there. I mentioned it last week after the cup match. You can definitely see a group of players that are buying into Stubbs' philosophy, but whether they're good enough as a whole to bring that club back to where they should be is another matter. Now, I look at that team and I think, you know what, they're good enough to probably give Ross County or St Mirren a game in a playoff match. But the other side of the coin is, I don't know how they would do against Rangers and Queen of the South in the earlier rounds. Queen of the South are a decent outfit. Rangers, albeit not being very well managed just now, have still got players who over 2 legs could easily go through. So it's so weird. I find myself some weeks really coming to the positive side of it, and then there's other weeks like this week where it's hard not to think other than negative about the way the club's playing, because you can see all those negatives come out over a 90 minute spell. There is problems in midfield. Defensively, I still think Fontaine and Hanlon possibly aren't the right pairing. I think Foster needs to come back, obviously, and obviously there's now question marks over the goalkeeper, whether he's going to be here past January. So there is still lots for Stubbs to try and cover in January when it comes to the transfer market.
Ross, Allo up next for Hibs. What are your thoughts on that? Can they get back to winning ways? Easter Road's been a wee bit of a difficult place for them, actually. They tended to cope a wee bit better away from home. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, as we tried to stay away from the statistics, as you said, they aren't looking pretty for Easter Road. But saying that, Alloa are kind of hit, the last couple of games have hit a wee bit of form. Let's just say, I don't know how many changes they've made in the team that's created that, but it's one of those games that I can't see past Hibs losing it. I really can't. I think they will win the game, but it'll be a tight game, just simply because I don't think they've got that monkey off the back yet as Easter Road's in front of their own fans. Their fans seem to be a group of people that get on top of their team very quickly. And
that's certainly not unique to Easter Road, I have to say.
No,
we've
absolutely.
had the same conversation about Tynecastle, despite the situations being entirely different. But
but when you've not got even a glimpse of kind of atmosphere, on top of that, we might get a goal which then starts the singing and stuff at Easter Road. It just doesn't seem to be any type of joy in the stands. You kind of see them all sitting there, and there's like loads of empty seats and stuff. The players must kind of, it does definitely go on to the players, that type of feeling.
It's a difficult situation, because I think, as we say, I think most clubs in Britain are actually in that situation now where the game starts and the fans will sit not in silence on purpose, but there is a genuine lack of atmosphere because they're waiting on something to happen to sing or cheer about. And that's one thing when there is this impending sense that that thing is about to happen. It could happen any moment. There's another when there is a real jaded sense in the stadium that this thing might never happen and we're really just here, we're just here to make up the numbers, or because we've bought our season ticket, or out of just sheer loyalty to the cause. We're here with no real belief that this is going to go the way we want it to. Is how the Hibs fans change that, how the Hibs players is it as simple as they need to come roaring out the blocks in the first 20 minutes?
Not really. I mean, the question about atmosphere at football games now is a lot bigger than just Hibs, I'm afraid. There's certain people talking about creating a family atmosphere similar to the MLS, and there's people wanting booze back to the game, and it's all mixed signals, and you really don't
take up too much of our content for later, just in case.
There's too many opinions when it comes to sort of what can get the atmosphere back. Obviously there's a nervousness amongst the support, and rightly so. They've had a really poor run of form at home this season, and there's even been games like the game against Hearts just a couple of months ago where they looked fairly comfortable, and then they got the sucker punch in the last sort of few seconds. So it's hard to really pinpoint. Obviously, coming out the traps might work, but if you don't get a goal in those first 20 minutes, then obviously the fans think, well, we should have scored when we were on top, and then it's so hard to sort of judge, what's going to obviously get the fans sort of behind them again.
Right, let's dispense with the negativity and look at the next 3 games for Hibs. The reason I choose 3 games is partly because it takes us up to the end of the year, and also because it takes us up to the next derby. And we're in a weird situation this season where the 1st of January is also the halfway point for the season. So you're at you've got the opportunity to step back then and think, what do we need to change at this point? The next 3 games are Alloa at Easter Road, Wraith Rovers away, and Rangers at Easter Road. What points target do you think Alan Stubbs will be setting for those? Is it as simple as 9 points?
I think he'll be setting 7. I think he'll probably look at the Rangers game and he'll say, if we can get a draw, then fair enough. But I think he will be trying to obviously win the next couple of games to try and further the gap, because unfortunately, again, you're going back to being negative, but Hibs as a group of players and as a club, they need to start looking behind them rather than above them now. There's only 2 points between them and Falkirk. There's only 4 between them and Rafe. So first things first, get 6 points in the next 2 games. Start widening that gap between yourselves in 5th and 6th, and then concentrate on what's above you. And by the time Rangers come, hopefully Rangers have maybe dropped points this Friday night.
Yeah.
You might be able to sort of say, well, let's get a win, let's get creeping back up on Rangers, start fighting for second.
I agree with you, and that's what I was kind of getting at earlier, going through this run and still finding yourself significantly behind Rangers and Hearts, that it then becomes a point of you feel like you're just always chasing shadows, you're never quite going to get there, and there is a real job to set yourself achievable targets. These are things that we can achieve, that if we do them, it takes us into the playoffs on a high. We feel like we've got momentum, and then we can get up. The problem is if they go into the playoffs, say 20, 25, 30 points behind the team in first or second, then you feel like you've failed, and it's this real sense of impending doom going into, or just disappointment, just lack of excitement about the end of the season, where for everyone involved, Hibs really need to have that momentum going into the playoffs, and if that does mean just setting different targets for the second half, that's what has to happen.
As long as they beat Rangers, though.
Exactly. What do you think, Ross, in terms of the next 3 games? If you were a Hibs fan, putting yourself in their shoes, going into the derby on the 3rd of January, what do you need or want to see from the next 3 games that gives you real faith that next year will be a different year for Hibs?
Well, I think in terms of what they'll actually pick up, obviously they will be aiming for 9. There's no doubt about it. Those teams are there for the taking. It depends what Hibs team turns up, but it also depends what Rangers team turns up. I personally think they'll get 5 points out of that. I think they'll get a victory, but I just see a draw against Rangers But we'll see. I mean, I'm obviously gunning for Rangers. They beat Rangers. It increases the gap for us. In terms of what they'll be happy with to see them into the next batch of games, they just need to see more determination and players that have not stepped up their game yet because they've been brought in for injuries and whatnot, players going to African nations, etc., that they need to really step up their game now, because they are not going to be here at the end of the season if they don't. I mean, they're in the Championship. They should be getting told, and they will be getting told, I have no doubt about Stubbs pulling them aside and saying, do you realise the chance you've got to be one of the first names on the team sheet? You know, players, especially in midfield, have been in and out, but they need that strong 11 on the pitch every week. And if they get that, and if the injuries stop, then that'll make Hibs a better side, and I think that'll be the fans will be happier.
I slightly disagree with both of you, because I've got a funny feeling about the Rangers game. I just think that's nailed on, a Hibs win. I think that's the one that I'm looking at, and I'm just confident that Hibs have got everything in the locker, because the big thing is pressure's off Hibs there. Hibs can go out and play in the way that they did at Ibrox, and that the real pressure will be on McCoist. Everyone will be waiting for him to fail if he's still in the job, which we have to assume because of money he will be. And I think Hibs can really just go out and play with the kind of freedom that they did at Ibrox, and I think Rangers also will have to open up and go at them. And we know that Hibs are really good on the counter-attack. The problem is that they're not being given many opportunities to counter-attack this season, because it's not that type of league. Teams didn't have to come out really and beat Hibs. That's why we're not, although Hibs they've been on a great run of late, but throughout the season they have lost daft games and sometimes thrown things away. They've never been hammered. We're not seeing them getting beat 3 or 4-0 at any point, or even seeing them concede huge amounts of goals, because teams didn't actually open up that much to really annihilate you. They're happy to take a 1-goal win against you, and the problem is when you then can't hit back, as the problem was a stuttering attack against Falkirk at the weekend. Okay, I'm going to go to a couple of ads, and then we will come back, and in the continued absence of our guest, which I think we can pretty much write off at this point, we will talk about Hearts versus Queen of the South, which was a very interesting game and an exciting game, and I think there's loads to talk about from it. And then we will get on to the fan culture debate. It's been talked about a lot over the last week after Anne Budge's statement, but we have yet to have our say other than a blog on our WordPress, which is mondaynightfootball.wordpress.com, which Scott wrote from a Hearts perspective and puts our fans' view across. But we will discuss it at length. I'll maybe play devil's advocate and we'll see how that goes. But we're going to go a couple of ads, and then we'll come back with Hearts Queen of the South.
Radio Saltaire is a community radio station located in Trinent and East Lothian, who are looking for presenters and station volunteers of all ages. So if you think you've got what it takes, or always wanted to give it a go, we can train you up and give you that opportunity. So please get in touch by emailing info@radiosaltaire.org or contact us using the website www.radiosaltaire.org, community radio station for Scotland.
And we are back on Monday Night Football. I'm still Sam, he's still Scott, he's still Ross. You'll just have to guess from there.
Ian Beard's still missing.
Missing in action. Given a few of the stories in his autobiography, which we will discuss when we eventually get to speak to him at some point in the future, given that I've paid £5.14 or something for his autobiography, given some of the stories there, he's probably up to something pretty eventful. He's maybe had an interesting night last night, let's put it that way. Let's talk about Hearts. We'll just go through the game initially and we'll see where that leads us. Bit of a game of two halves, although one was kind of a half of two halves. The first half, we scored a great goal, James Keating's. I'm starting to think possibly is my brother, because he's certainly my father's love child. Let's talk about him a wee bit, the difference he's made coming into the team over the last few weeks.
I think his technique is top notch.
Scott, you look love-struck.
No, if you look at the goals he's scored for Hearts so far, and you look at how he takes that ball on Saturday. Now, given some of the forwards we've had to watch, some of the inept donkeys that we've had to watch over the last 10 years, I mean, I'll just say Mo, Glenn and Klimek and Vitavine, just for four names. none of those players would have tried that effort. They were all taking the ball and ran into a corner or ran round in a circle or fell over the damn thing. So it's maybe so much, I don't know if it's so much he's a great player or if it's just we've been so starved of watching someone with a bit of instinct and technique up front that it maybe just accentuates his positives.
He's got a bit of swagger to him though, I think, and that you're correct with that chance. So many other more workmanlike strikers, you can just imagine them trying to take it on their knee and it rolling 6 yards further than they thought, and the goalie gathering, and you're thinking that wasn't even really a half chance. Whereas with him, it looked like a proper chance because he's just got the ability to just take it like that.
Yeah.
That seems to be actually playing a part with defenders, and that whether they're aware of his reputation or he's just that much of a nuisance. We saw Lee McCulloch panic when James Keatings came on, and it led to a goal. The Queen of the South defender at the weekend, was it Durnan? That messed up the header. That seemed to be in some way influenced by the fact that he knew Keatings was right there on his shoulder, because normally you would expect him to deal with that better. How massive a thing is it, the swagger that he has in terms of just that wee bit intimidation of the defences that were playing, Ross?
Well, I think that defenders in advance have been watching him on video, because the way that, as you say, they react to him in advance of him not even being there, they kind of know that he's challenging for every single ball, especially in the air. When you look at him, his stature and stuff, you just do not expect that. He plays like a lone striker as well, even though you had Buchanan with him on Saturday. Great player. His swagger is exactly what we need, especially with all the injuries we've got. There's no way you can keep him out of the team now. Even with the players coming back, I'd keep him in straight away. He scored that was a great goal at the weekend. He's shown he got that in his locker, and absolutely brilliant. I'd stick him up on his own as well, and I never thought I'd say that at the beginning of the season. If we need to go down that route, then absolutely fine. We'd have changed to that system at the weekend for a period of time. But no, I'm absolutely delighted with him.
Well, it's interesting. I remember talking about it 2 months ago or something. Now we've been doing the show that long there, kind of. You don't think it could have possibly been 2 months ago, but it definitely was. I remember talking with Sean McMurdo, who is another real Keatings lover, when he was in the studio, and we were talking about how you look at Keatings because of his stature and you think the one thing he can do is a lone striker. He needs to play off someone, but in actual fact he scored a hat-trick at Wraith as a lone striker because we were just short of options that weekend as well. And we sort of saw that again at the weekend, that his stature doesn't really make a difference. He does still hold it in fairly well, especially for someone his size. He wins more than his fair share in the air, and he does actually dominate because he has got the legs simply to make himself a nuisance at all times. Moving on to the one negative of the first half, but maybe a positive for James Keatings, is he now back on penalties? Because we seem to be having another one of those seasons where we've got all these foreign players and we're actually pretty successful across the board, but we've just not really got someone who's particularly dominant from the spot.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of this whoever wins it kind of takes it kind of mentality, or certain guys just grabbing the ball and saying, well, it's up to me to take it, I'm the most experienced guy on the park. And that's what it looked like with Blabbin on Saturday. For me, James Walker scores the last penalty very well, great technique, done it under pressure as well in a big game. He should have been taking it. It should have been his chance. I don't think Blabbin should have been taken. It wasn't the worst penalty.
To be fair, Blabbin was on them before Walker and had scored his.
But if you look at the one against Dumbarton,
yes, it hit the back of the net, which is ultimately what counts.
I mean, it wasn't the worst penalty.
That's the thing. There was a reaction to it in terms of, oh, what a waste. But it was. I always get annoyed when people at the post, because yes, it's missing the target, but it's also 4 inches away from the perfect penalty. You know, that penalty where they hit the side net and then you say no keeper in the world saves that. And Buabin was inches away from that. So I think it's harsh to cane him too much. But ultimately, you're right. That's now one that he's missed and one that he got away with. So I think that's probably enough to take him off penalties, in the same way that as soon as So skied that one at Celtic Park, his number was up. But it will actually be a wee bit telling in terms of seeing who is the next name, because there's not necessarily, like you say, maybe Jamie Walker, but then in theory Jamie Walker could be dropping out at a certain point with Sam Nicholson coming back in. it's going to be strange to see who it goes to, because I feel like now we've maybe not got an outstanding candidate who hasn't already been on them.
Let's get Neil Alexander.
So
I'm a bit surprised Big Aleem's not been up there wanting to take one, to be honest.
So yeah, that's a name that has been mentioned when I've brought this up to a couple of people, and it is that thing of just imagining him absolutely raking them up from 12 yards, having to have the guy on standby to replace the net every time we win a penalty. But why not? It takes every other set piece, so it does make sense. McHattie's another one, as and when he's back, takes a lot of set pieces. Eckersley, maybe that finish that we'll no doubt get on to. Right, let's look at the three behind Keatings. We've mentioned already the fact that Buchanan started out next to Keatings and then fairly quickly got dispatched to wide left, and we saw Walker move inside and sort of play as a number 10. How did we feel that three worked?
I think fairly decently. I thought King looked his most threatening for quite a few weeks. Not everything came off, but then it doesn't have to. He looked like he was sort of back on form. Buchanan, I thought, linked up well. When he did see the ball, didn't seem to see the ball very often, but when he did, he played pretty well. And Walker was, again, excellent. His attitude since he's came back in the team this season, compared to last season where I felt he was leaving McHattie out to dry on quite a few matches to sort of go up against four other players every game. I'd say, you know, Walker's attitude has been absolutely spot on. He was tracking back. He forced Mark Kerr into losing possession on 2 or 3 occasions in the first half alone, and his use of the ball has improved. He doesn't seem to be hogging it as much for himself. He knows when to lay it off now, bringing others into the game. So yeah, it's been a massive improvement in his game.
What are your thoughts on him in that number 10 position?
Yeah, definitely, because I think as an old-fashioned winger, he doesn't quite cut it for me. He always looks like he wants to cut inside, whether it's on his left or on his right foot. So I think playing the number 10 would be ideal, because I think he's quite comfortable on both feet. So he's got, you know, technique-wise, he can quite easily play that position, and positioning-wise, he seems to have a fairly decent understanding as to, you know, what his role is. Because, as I say, it wasn't just his offensive style of his game that he had spot on. He was tracking back and forcing, you know, Queen of the South to make mistakes as well.
It's another thing that I thought has come up in various conversations that we've had over the last few weeks that kind of came to fruition at the weekend there, and that we've spoken a lot about Jamie Walker, that he's got 2 main problems as a winger. One is that he's no discernible turn of pace, so he struggles if he tries to take it down the line. It's difficult for him to make that extra yard for a cross, because he just can't get away from you in the way that maybe Nicholson and King can. But also his instinct does seem to be to come inside, sometimes not just to come in off the line, but literally just to start inside and stay inside the whole time. And the real problem we had with that was that he was in someone else's space all the time. What we kind of did pretty well at the weekend was just take the other player out and just say, well, you go there, because today you're not in anyone else's space. That is your space. Go in there, dominate it. And I thought we definitely saw him come more and more into the game there. And yeah, Buchanan suffered a wee bit because of it, because ultimately he ended up just being an ad hoc winger.
Yeah.
But that was just concentrating on our strengths, because ultimately Buchanan was there because of injury and was there to do a job and not give the ball away, but was never really going to be our match winner. So we just concentrated on the best players. Billy King's an interesting one, because we've been saying for the last month that he's been out of form, but he did certainly in the last 20 minutes seem to make a few more telling contributions than he has been lately.
Yeah, I think he was annoyed at himself in the first part of the game, because he wasn't really doing much. He became, I think, when he got moved inside a little bit, when Buchanan was going out, then maybe it started to pick up in his game a little bit. There was a couple of times when he did his kind of mazy run around the edge of the box and stuff, but I still think that he's going to be an impact player in terms of coming off the bench. And I hate saying that, because
once Nicholson's back, you mean?
Once Nicholson's back, because I'm a massive fan of King. I'm a really big fan of him, and I hate to say that, but I think he needs a lot of work in terms of coming in and out of games. He's not consistent enough. Yes, he's a winger, and that's what they're there for, but I still think that he needs to work a bit on, you know, he needs a bit. He seems like he needs a bit of momentum when he gets the ball to then do something with it. He, as you did mention earlier, he gets the ball sometimes and he can make a bit of magic, but it's not as often as I like in this league.
Yeah.
In the SPL, fair enough, there's going to be better players there. but in terms of the impact he has on a game on a regular basis, it's just not as much as the other guys yet, like Nicholson.
Is he a wee bit shot shy at the moment? I noticed there was one first half. There's one first half that he hit a bit of trundler into the keeper, and the keeper kind of fumbled it over, and it actually nearly led to something, but it wasn't the greatest hit. Second half, I remember there being one. I think Keating's maybe dropped off and laid it across the 18-yard box to him, and he should have probably had it first time. It was maybe just a couple inches too far away from him, and he ended up letting it roll across his body and then hitting it 2 yards after he should have and skied it well over the bar. And then obviously the back heel was fantastic. But I'm not necessarily that sure that Billy King of 8 weeks ago wouldn't have cut inside and had that on his right foot. What do you think, Scott? Is he changing his game because he's maybe a wee bit lacking in confidence in front of goal?
Possibly, but I mean, to be fair to him, I don't think I've noticed too much over the last few weeks him being shot shy. I think he has had quite a few efforts. I think he's scored 5 goals this season and he's had countless assists. I think he does seem to be one of these guys that is a little bit underrated, and I'm probably guilty of it myself. I sometimes look at his overall game and look at sometimes the physical side to his game, and sometimes think he still needs to work on that. And I sometimes forget about the fact that he probably is top of the assist charts for us, and possibly one of the highest assist makers in the league. And also he has chipped in with 5 goals. And as we've already alluded to with Hibs, talking about Hibs earlier on tonight, Hibs don't have anyone like that in their midfield.
No, and it does set us apart, but it's more the conviction in the shots than actually having the shots, and I think that's why we're maybe seeing his goals have tailed off of late. You're right in that his assists haven't necessarily is still playing a part in that sense, but it's that conviction to finish off a move that I'm not quite. He seems to want one touch more than he would have wanted when he was really in the height of that goal scoring run, and I do wonder if. I hope that last 20 minutes has shaken him out of that and he's got that swagger back, he's got the confidence back. But it felt for a wee while, a couple of weeks there, like he was just waiting on Nicholson getting back to give him a few weeks off.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's just tiredness, maybe. It's maybe something we're no factoring in, but because we've said about these guys, we're all used to playing first team football last season, but they lost every week last season, or most weeks last season. So at that point, their job was really just to turn up and not make mistakes. This season they're being asked to play at the peak of their ability every single week. That takes a different type of fitness.
I think King is someone who, Robbie Neilson might have wanted to have rotated at some stage over the last month or so, but like you say, because of the number of injuries and suspensions that the team suffered this season, King's had to become almost an ever-present, in the league games anyway. I think he maybe has suffered a little bit because of that, and obviously against Celtic he was having to play more as a right back than a right winger, so maybe he was still feeling the after effects of that. But I felt as the game went on, he definitely was threatening, and even if everything wasn't coming off for him, he was definitely giving Queen of the South a lot to think about, because their left back's quite impressive, and I didn't see him go forward as much as what I have in previous games against other sides. So he definitely kept the lad Holt quite quiet for them.
Nathan Flanagan came on at the end, and I thought that was actually a wee bit important, because over the last few weeks with King struggling, I think we've actually seen something that probably none of us as Hearts fans really anticipated, in that the wings are possibly a wee bit of a weakness for us, in that we've got 3 players who are fantastic there, but 3 players for 2 positions isn't the same cover that we've got in most other positions of the team. So we're in the situation, as you say, Nicholson's out, we've only got 2 players for 2 positions. And I thought Walker took a knock fairly early on and had to nurse that throughout the 90, because we're so short for strikers, we've no one to go there. Buchanan has to go in and do that defensive work in the left midfield because we can't afford for Walker to get caught. Do we need, it's maybe not an obvious concern, but I think it has come up. Could we do with a winger in January?
I did think, I spoke about this with Gary Mackay last week, and I did think that because of the injuries, more than anything else, we possibly did need a right-sided midfielder and another forward, because we were talking, and in terms of forward, somebody that you could bring on for, say, the last 10-15 minutes of a game that we were losing 1-0, somebody who, if we wanted to go route one, we could maybe bring somebody on. So they were the 2 positions I was looking at for possibly strengthening in January if we have the funds to do so. Who knows what that's going to be like, but yeah, I would definitely agree with you on that.
I was slightly different. I was kind of in the view that the players that we have are impact players and they can change the game when they're brought on. I think we need someone that's more solid, kind of like a Camisola back in the day. There's a name drop for
it. Like a tactical kind of option.
Exactly, yeah. Someone who's there for a specific reason, because we don't have that on either wings. It's these guys, or we stick, maybe even Robinson, or we've had Keatons in the wing, or someone,
I know what you mean, to kind of balance it out, so you can have left wing goes, right wing stays. And
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense. Let's move on to balance of the team then. Morgaro Gomez was missing. It's almost quite easy to forget that now, because we got through a relatively impressive win, but he is one that we've predicted throughout the season would probably be the biggest miss of all because of the way he dictates the tempo. How did you feel we coped without him?
In some elements okay, but there was that spell for 15-20 minutes where I felt like Queens wouldn't have seen as much of the ball if he'd been playing, and that's no knock on the guys who were playing. I think Bayardo had another solid game. I think Boabin played better when we pushed him further up the park, and he was able to dictate things further up the field. And I thought Robinson done really well when he came on. It was a great substitution for Nielsen, who obviously was very much aware of Queen of the South being on top at that stage of the game, and I felt that Robinson showed the energy in terms of winning the ball, but Prado's quite, you never really see him breaking sweat getting to the ball, whereas Gomez is quite an all-action sort of defensive midfielder, and I felt like Robinson was closer to that when he came on. He was snapping away at folks' heels. He was maybe not always winning the ball, but causing a Queen's player to maybe have to play up a pass a lot quicker than what he was 10-15 minutes earlier in the second half.
I don't wish to take anything away from Scott Robinson, Ross, because it's rare that he receives plaudits, universally at least, from Hearts fans, but he has received a lot of plaudits. How much of that was down to his performance when he came on, and how much of it was down to the change of shape and giving us the extra man in the middle of the park at that stage?
I think it was the second part. I mean, Robinson for me, I'm not saying he's a bad player. I really am not, and I've actually been guilty of maybe defending him too much in the past. But I think it was the whole same situation when Buchanan went to the wing. He was in the right place at the right time and in that position. He wasn't really brought into the game to, do other than the job he was supposed to be doing there, and to be part of that midfield to make it more packed everyone in the middle, and keep it solid. He done that really well. Nothing more, nothing less, and he passed the ball to Boabin obviously for the goal. So yeah, overall, great to get him back in the team. I think he deserved a chance, as any player that we've had for that length of time has. I don't see him here at the end of the season, to be honest. But at the end of the day, great.
That position does play to all of his strengths, though, doesn't it? When, to use a horrendous modern football cliche, when we invert the midfield pyramid and we go with two defensive midfielders and an attacking midfielder, that being the second defensive midfielder who does the harrying and the chasing, while, as you say, Gallardo kind of holds it together a wee bit more, that suits all of Robinson's strengths, doesn't it?
Yeah, and like Ross says, I don't envision him being here past January either, and it's a bit of a shame, because like Walker, he's another one that I think his attitude's improved since Robbie's came in.
Yeah.
Now, there has been incidents under other managers. There was the incident where he told Jeffries he didn't want to play as a forward, even in the first team. There was the incident when he obviously refused to go on the bench under McGlynn, but you don't see any aspect of that to his game, or off the field hearing any stories whilst Nielsen's been in charge. Whenever he has played, he's played fairly well. When he's came onto the park as a sub the last two games, he's been very positive as well. So that is good to see, even if it is from a player who I think his future probably does lie elsewhere. I think he won't have a problem finding a half decent club, maybe in the top end of this league or the bottom end of the SPL, and I wish him all the best when it happens, because it does look like it will happen in January now. I think he'll probably have taken the hint that he isn't very close to being a first team player at Hearts any longer.
And a couple of further performances like that at the weekend, maybe cameos in winning sides where he's influential, and it starts to raise his stock to the point where it suits him to leave at this point.
Yeah.
When it, like you say, he can then go to another team and command a place in it. I only wasn't in that team because look how much better they are than the competition, kind of thing. But it doesn't suit anyone for him to go another 5 months and maybe no feature as much as he is at the moment. At least in his couple of performances lately. Right, let's start to wrap up on Hearts then. Any points to make on the back five?
a little bit over casual at times from Wilson and Ozturk. And to be fair to Wilson, he's not played much football over the last month or two, so you can excuse him for that. There was one incident in the second half where he totally switched off, where Queens had a throw, and it was as if he forgot about the whole you can't be offside for a throw-in, and he just let the Queens forward just drift past them and started, as Wilson tends to do sometimes, just start jogging back the way. I did find myself screaming at him at that point, but it was a decent performance for the back five. I thought Patterson again played fairly well. Eckersley, I mean, I've probably been one of his biggest fans for his first game and defended him even back then. I think he's been solid for us. It was a great strike for the fourth goal as well.
It's funny your point on Danny Wilson, to go back to my old man's favourites. My old man likes Danny Wilson, but he's got this idea that when Danny Wilson's bad, it's because he's like a 14-year-old boy playing for the school football team and all the lassies have just turned up to watch. And it's that thing of like, look how cool I am, by the way. I can get away with it, even breaking a sweat. Watch this 70-yard rasping diagonal pass. And that's normally when, like you say, it gets overly casual, and he tries to, it's that wee Andy Webster Stoller thing, that like sometimes you'll be fine like that, sometimes you'll look really, really stupid, and I think that is when he suffers. That you saw with his goal, and when he gets a rocket up him, he can make a massive difference for us when he's got drive about his game. But sometimes he's reclined and his distribution suffers. And I thought you made a great point in your match report that's on our blog site at mondaynightfootball.wordpress.com, where you said about the first goal actually came from one of the worst contributions of the first half. And
that's one of those awful kind of floating clearances.
It was terrible to a 5'7" striker. He's going to win that loads. But like we say, we benefited from the fact that he's a wee nuisance and the defender panicked and made a bit of a mistake and we got a goal out of it. But in actual fact, I don't think Robbie will be watching the video of that back and saying, what a great goal we scored there.
Definitely not.
I think he'll be watching it back saying, I didn't want to see that from you again, Danny, because that was hopeful, really, at best.
Yeah, and the positives though from that, I mean, the defence, there was a lot of the switching between Wabin going back into defence when Ozturk or Wilson goes forward is a lot quicker now. It just seems to be everyone knows exactly what they're doing. Gomez was out of the team. I thought maybe that part of the game would maybe suffer a little bit, but it was actually quicker for me in that game. If you watch it back, Wabin's straight in as soon as Ozturk's out, and vice versa with Wilson.
We've actually been helped by injury crisis at points as well, because Buabin's had to, like at Alloa, Danny Wilson goes off injured, Buabin has to play there for the last 10 minutes. He has had periods where he literally plays as the second centre half, so he's now quite comfortable going, I'll just play next to Aline because I've done that before.
And Patterson for me was the man of the match. I'm surprised he didn't get on the score sheet, to be honest. And obviously the penalty. So I have to talk about this because I wasn't here last week, and thank God I wasn't here last week, because I would have went on a tirade for about an hour. Nobody else would have got a word in. But how many weeks in a row is that now of referees? We're talking about them. It's absolutely ridiculous. And
I keep trying to steer us away from it, because ultimately, as we said last week, it doesn't get us anywhere.
Well, I'm sorry, but
nothing ever changes, and it ultimately
both decisions were soft at the weekend as well for both sides. It was, both penalties were very debatable.
Aye, there's maybe an argument that evens it. I have to say that maybe it is the maroon spectacles, but our one looked more of a pen, because at least it was inside the box. And there was a wee bit of the guy thinking, I'm coming through you no matter what. But yeah, ultimately the positive thing is that at least in the league we've been able to just brush these things off and say, well, we've got through them anyway. There was a really funny moment. Anyone who has a Hearts TV subscription, it is worth watching the interview with Robbie Neilson, because about a minute in, maybe a minute and a half in, the interview's interrupted and he kind of says, alright, see you, Craig, and then turns to Phil, who does the interviews, and says to him, you've got to keep them sweet, and it transpires that it's the referees leaving Tynecastle and him kind of, see you later guys, and that really awkward look on his face as he tries to acknowledge the camera, and this thing of letting on to referees is quite interesting. But yeah, we've not had the breaks, but how positive is it that we've not had the breaks and we've still won the games?
Yeah,
obviously
increasing the gap for a start. I mean, after everyone's saying, we're going through our sticky patch, which we are, and we're coming out of it hopefully now, to see we're increasing the gap, rather than Hibs catching up with us, because I'm not really that concerned about Rangers at the moment. It is obviously great to see for us. As long as we keep that gap there now and we kind of kick on and the team becomes more solid, the players that come back from injury slot right back into the roles. I mean, I know So's now going to be out for a little bit longer than we had hoped, so that's a kind of opportunity for Keaton's now to make that position his own rather than coming in at the team. But for the rest of the team, there's not that much to kind of be worried about in terms of fitness. It's more them trying to get back to match fitness rather than be injured.
Right, let's preview the weekend then, because we may even get wrapped up somewhere close to 11 o'clock. Bonus. Right, big game of the weekend, because, as we say, the midway point in the season is in sight, and Robbie has, for once, been forthright in his view that we're not just taking one game at a time here. We've set ourselves a target for maximum points of December to get us through 50 points from our first 54, unbeaten for the first half of the season, and going into the derby off the back of a good run of wins. Looking first at the weekend, how achievable is it that we go to Cowdenbeath and we come away with the 3 points?
Obviously very achievable, and I would like to say that when we were asked for our points total for the next quarterly games, I did say 25, I think.
Did you?
Yeah.
I said 23. I thought I was most ambitious.
Yeah, and I did say Hibs would still be quite inconsistent as well, and that was definitely not said through gritty teeth.
Well, we will be reviewing this round about New Year, so let's not get too carried away.
Yeah, I know, after saying that, we'll probably lose our next 3 games. I can't see there being any, there's no really any real reason to be concerned about Saturday, I wouldn't imagine. The players seem to be dealing with every challenge that's put out in front of them just now, whether it's suspensions, injuries, or even teams like Queen of the South coming out and playing some really good stuff at the weekend. So as long as they're patient, which they seem to be doing just now, as long as the fans sort of stick behind them, which is always a lot easier in the away fixtures, then I can see it being a 2 or 3-0 game.
Ross, is your biggest concern the facilities, the setup, the pitch?
Oh, you could say that. I mean, thinking about the games against, for instance, Alloa, I'm probably more worried about this pitch than the Alloa pitch. I've never been there personally, but the stories I've heard from both sets of fans are that it's just not the best. It's as kind of polite as I can kind of be. My only real concern is that El Has is rushed back. I really hope Keaton stays in the team. El Has may partner him up front, but I think if El Has is put in the team, then that means Keaton's dropped to the bench and he's played up front on his own again. So in terms of the scoreline, I agree. To change it, I'll say 2-1, because we've been guilty conceding the odd goal now and again. So 2-1 for me. I've seen it being a comfortable game, but I just think Cowdenbeath will score at some point.
Scott, does Central Park concern you at all? The idea of it being a real old-fashioned leveller, more so than maybe even the difficult trips we've faced so far? You're screwing your face up in a way that I've never seen before.
No, not really. I think it's a bit over-egged when people talk about these places. I think,
the mythology of it all.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, if you look at the quality of the players that are going to be out in front of you, Hearts should be able to, as long as Hearts play to their capabilities, or even sort of 75% of that, they should really be strolling games like this with the confidence that they've got, given the results we've had this season. So, yeah, it would really need to be one of those games where nothing's coming off for them, and Queen of the South stay dogged and obviously sort of nick a goal for a set play. I mean, when they came to Tynecastle, they weren't a bad side in the first half, but obviously fitness told in the end in the second. We never really had to get out of first gear to sort of win the game 5-1. So I can't really see there being any problems.
Okay, let's hope yous are correct. I am a wee bit more concerned about it, just because I think Cowdenbeath, more so than anyone else, or more so than anywhere else, is set up to be a real leveller. They are quite happy to play into this thing. We're a small club, these are low quality facilities, and we just have to make do with what we've got, and they are willing to maybe indulge in a wee bit of skullduggery to try and bring teams down to their level. Nothing wrong with that whatsoever, and like we've said, like every other challenge that's been put in front of us, we'll need to rise above it to win. I hope that we can, but it does just concern me a wee bit more. I still think we'll win. I just think it may take us a long time. It may be a bit like Alloa, and we may start to have Dumbarton flashbacks and PTSD kicking in.
I think Dumbarton and Alloa are better set up teams though. I think their managers have got
Possibly,
the right shape in those sides. I don't see that in Cowdenbeath. I do see a group of individuals. I don't really see any game plan whenever I've watched them play, even against Hibs or Rangers. So yeah, I know they only got beat by an own goal at the weekend, but by the sounds of it, Rangers probably could have had 2 or 3 more in that match. So I don't think they're playing particularly well.
Right, while we're debating the merits of opposition, then I would like, if we've got 5 minutes maybe toward at the end of the show here, I'd like to talk a wee bit about Queen of the South, because they're going to have a big influence in this title race. We hope, starting on Friday night. It would be very nice to see them triumph in Friday night's game, which I believe is on BBC Alba, and I actually think
it's BT Sport.
Is it BT Sport?
Yeah, I think it's a BT Sport game actually.
That could be right, because Falkirk certainly played Rangers on BT Sport on Friday night. So the viewing figures will certainly be increased by the Jambos crowding around the tellies to watch that. Let's talk about the merits of their game. I have to say, over the twice we've played them this season, I think now we can go back and reevaluate the win early in the season, which I think at the time we thought we were a bit sloppy for half an hour and then eventually got together. Now I think we were just faced with a really good football team for half an hour. We rode the storm and we managed to nick a couple of goals that really influenced the way it went. I think it was a bit similar on Saturday, that we managed to ride their good spell of the game and come through it unscathed. I'm not so confident that Rangers have got the quality or the character to do that. If Queen of the South go after them the way they did against us, I could see Rangers succumbing to that.
I think if they move the ball at pace like they did against us for a good 20 minutes in the second half, then Rangers will definitely suffer. I mean, Rangers, there's no legs in that team. I mean, we've talked about guys with great international experience, but Miller, his legs have went. McCulloch's, I mean, he went 2 or 3 years ago, I'd say. So yeah, I mean, even guys like Lee Wallace look a yard slower after playing in the lower leagues the last couple of years. So you do look at it and think that is definitely a potential sort of, I wouldn't even say shock, the way things are going for Rangers this year. I definitely wouldn't call it a shock if Queen of the South got a result. So it's Rangers are really going to have to step up in this game. This is going to be a real tough ask, and I think Queen of the South will probably even have more a go at them than what Hearts and Hibs have done in previous matches against Rangers. I can see Queen of the South really taking it to them.
Yeah, I think they're an intelligent group of players, intelligent enough to identify Rangers' weaknesses, and they've definitely got the legs to hurt them. Absolutely. I mean, long term, in terms of how they're going to affect where we are finishing in the table, depends on January. There may be teams in there that are going to pick up a few of the players, depending on how much their contract's left. I'm not 100% sure.
I believe James Fowler touched on, he was on Sportsline tonight talking about a wee bit.
Well, they were saying that we were linked with the lad Durnan.
Yeah, might actually be a target for us in January, and he's hoping to hold on to him through to next summer. But he didn't necessarily sound too confident that would be the case with all of the players. So yeah, you're right, they may lose some there, which may weaken them.
But in terms of Friday, I think it's going to be a draw. I've got confidence in them to take the game to Rangers, no doubt about it. But I still think Rangers have got some of the players there that can change it, even like a Shields, that can just change a game in a split second. So 1-1 for me.
Queen of the South played Hibs at Easter Road a few weeks ago and got a 0-0 draw. And by all accounts, that was all they ever set out to get from that game. They kept 10 men behind the ball at all times, they strangled the life of the game, and they happily settled for a 0-0. They came to Tynecastle at the weekend against a team who, in the league at least, are flying, maybe going through a slightly sticky patch, but able to score goals. And they did the complete opposite. They came at us. Certainly, once they got their football together, they really threw everything at us. What do you think was the thinking behind that, Scott?
I think there's a belief there that teams probably know that Hearts will wear you down if you do try and defend for the whole 90 minutes. And I think they've probably looked at the Hibs team and thought, if we are solid enough, and if we look at the 1 or 2 players that can hurt us, then we can stop them scoring. I mean, I talked about it in the blog, Hearts have scored 12 goals for defenders alone this season. There's goals coming from everywhere. They haven't really missed so, which, I'm very surprised to say, given some of my predictions at the start of this season. So yeah, I mean, for Friday, my own real concern as if Queen of the South do get a result and we turn it into, double,
12 points.
Yeah, 12 points, into double figures. Because if that happens, I've always said it, if it goes into double figures in terms of the lead over Rangers, I think McCoist could be put on gardening leave. I could really see them starting and maybe try and get McCall in or someone, because...
And I don't want to go too much in the Rangers thing, because it's just press saturation at this point. It's covered everywhere. But let's deal with it from a Hearts perspective. Does that frighten you, the idea of Rangers getting a competent manager in? Because I have to say, I still think I would rather have our manager with our squad.
Yeah, but it would be closer.
But it's like, in that sense, I agree with you, and that it'll be more competitive. But in the way that we're saying Hibs are more competitive, but look at the task they've given themselves to make up. I think, like you say, if it goes to 12, maybe even 15, because I'm fairly confident Hibs will get a result against Rangers, and if we keep winning the next 3 games, which are all winnable, it could, in theory, and it sounds like you're jinxing it because the superstitions come out, but on January the 1st it could be 15 points. At that point, I think they can give Jose Mourinho the job, and he'll still not catch Robbie Nelson's Hearts. I really don't, because I don't think we'll drop that amount of points.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of Rangers players and ex-pros and that talking about this thing about, we've still to play twice. Aye, but one of those games is the last day of the season. Mm-hmm. That's probably not going to count for much the way things are going now. So really, when you look at it, you're really needing Hibs and Queen of the South and that to do Rangers a favour now. Because we play them in January at Ibrox, but by that stage, like you say, it could be 15 points quite easily.
Let's hope so. We're all involved, because like we say, there is the thing as well that because McCoist is doing a poor job, it's assumed that someone else comes in and instantly does a better job. But that doesn't mean that there's then not still turmoil to go through. A lot of managers come in and they get that instant bounce of 4 games, but then there's that period of weeding out who they don't want. And at Rangers, there's not necessarily any money to replace the players that you don't want, and to get someone to pay Lee McCulloch what they're paying him just isn't going to happen. So you would need to either find room on the wage bill elsewhere or get him to agree to leave, which again, I'm not saying that he's not a loyal servant to the Ibrox club, but I would think that there's a wee bit of in it for himself, and he's thinking, well, I'm not just going to pass up maybe 5, 6, 8, 10, 12, 15 grand a week.
I think it's fair to say Lee knew his legs were away a couple of years ago when he decided to stay with them.
And there's the same question that's been raised about McCoist in terms of how much of it was loyalty and how much of it was a job for as long as he wants it, that he can never get sacked from, because they don't do walking away. Right, I didn't want to get dragged into Rangers too much. Ross, Queen of the South for the season ahead, based on the twice that we've encountered them now and what we've seen them put up against Hibs. Obviously they've beaten Hibs once and they've managed to get a 0-0 draw, albeit a fairly drab 0-0 draw at Easter Road. Do you think they can stay with the big 3, the so-called big 3, for the entire season? Do you expect them still to be really in amongst it come the playoffs?
I think there's going to be a gap between Rangers and Queen of South of probably about 10 points, I think, by the end of the season. I still think that Queen of South are there and thereabouts.
Do you think they'll finish third above Hibs?
No, I think that it'll be tight between Queen of South and Hibs. I still think Hibs will finish third. Okay. But I think it'll be a couple of points here or there in it, because Queen of South, I mean, I've said it to a lot of people, they're still my favourite side, my favourite side that I've come to Tynecastle in terms of how they've played and stuff like that. That includes the Hibs game. And I think the way that we played against Celtic is kind of like the same as the way the Queen of the South played against us, in terms of the score flattered the performance on the pitch. And Queen of the South have got really good players. Again, as I mentioned before, it all depends on what happens in January. So yes, I do see them there or thereabouts, but I think it's going to be a wee bit of a gap between the second and where they finish, and hopefully fourth.
Scott, if I said, just wrapping up on Queen of the South, if I said probably taking the derbies out of it because they're not really football matches, if I said that Queen of the South were the biggest footballing test we faced this season, would you disagree with that?
Not if you're just talking about Tynecastle. I think away from Tynecastle, I think Hibs have been the best side we've played. but at Tynecastle, I'd say Queen of the South have been the best side we've played. In terms of coming out and wanting to play, I think Hibs were quite conservative when they played back in August at Tyney.
I think Hibs have dominated us more, but because it's a derby, it's a bit more of a war of attrition. They played football at Easter Road, but really two players played the football and drove at us from the midfield, and we struggled to deal with it. But you can necessarily football.
You can say the same about Queens. I mean, the lad McShane and Russell were probably the two that were, pulling the strings for them at the weekend. Where they still had
their one-touch stuff at the back was decent.
It was decent, but I mean. Either or, really. I think you've got to give credit to probably both teams. They've both played pretty well against us now. Twice to be fair. Yeah,
I'm not trying to put you on the spot to get a definitive. It's just to establish that thing of this being.
Let's establish it's not been Rangers anyway.
No, and it was a league that was built up, and it's still being built by TV and media because it suits a point as a 3-team league, and the other guys there will maybe now and again throw a spanner in the works. And what I think we're seeing is that the quality of the big three isn't such that everyone else can be discounted. Yes, teams like Falkirk have probably disappointed on what we expected. They will throw a spanner in the works, as we saw at the weekend, but probably not a long-term concerted effort to actually challenge at the top of the table. Queen of the South, as we say, injuries and maybe transfers, people stealing their players away aside, they probably have got enough, if they can keep their first 11 out there, to actually still be in the mix come 5 or 6 games to go. Do we agree on that?
Yeah, I think every team bar Cowdenbeath and Livy are probably capable of giving you a really good match. Al have proved already.
He's really put his foot in it there with a Cowdenbeath comment before the weekend.
It's the same thing we talking about Chris Boyd a couple of weeks ago. It's just not going to happen, I'm afraid, this week. But yeah, I do think Queens will hopefully be there in fourth, because I think they'll give either Hibs or Rangers a really hard sort of two-legged game.
Good. And even if it is Hibs that they give a difficult game to, although we're all agreed that we would like both Edinburgh clubs to go up, that would be a positive thing, because you can't afford to have a gimme in that first game, because you really need to be at it throughout, because as we're saying, it may be the case where the season tails off a wee bit because the four now might start to pull away from the rest of the pack, and thus the team that's fourth really has nothing to play for the last 5 or 6 games. You need to know that you need to be right at it from the word go, and Queen of the South I think will provide that, whether it's Rangers or Hibs or whoever, or Hearts that they face in the playoffs. All of those teams will know they have to be right at it for the word go against Queen of the South, because they can throw a spanner in the works on a consistent basis rather than just a one-off. Okay, do we have any final points that we want to wrap up on before we leave it for tonight? Do you have anything pressing, Scott, that you would like to say about the Anne Budge fan behaviour Celtic debate that wasn't covered in your blog?
Nah, I mean, to be honest, I want to give Anne the benefit of the doubt. I think some of her comments were a little bit too general concerning both supports. I think she needed to probe this talk about family atmospheres and trying to build models compared to the MLS and that. I'm not quite sure that's going to fly in Scotland, where there's still a lot of relics like myself who like a bit of profanity at football games. But on the whole, she had the right idea at heart. But I hope she's got people informing her that it's not going to be quite that simple to just say, right, we've got kids coming to the games, we're going to have to watch what we're doing now. I mean, there is a reason there's a family stand at Tynecastle.
But that's a good point. Yeah. There is a separation that you can introduce that allows both experiences to still be possible, but you just can't have the extreme of the adult side.
That's the thing,
which then prohibits everything else.
I mean, that's where I felt I'm not quite sure she was totally on point when she was talking about the extreme side. It seemed like she was having a bit of a go at everyone.
Fans in general.
Yeah, just fans in general. And I think that's the one bit where she kind of let herself down. But it's nice to hear an owner of the club actually get involved in this side of things, because let's be honest, Romanov, apart from winding up Rangers and Celtic about things, really didn't care about that side of Scottish football. So it's good to see her getting involved at such an early stage.
And it does feel like she's got her finger on the pulse, and this is the kind of thing that we would want it would be one of the top 5 on the list. Is that what are your big problems with coming to Tynecastle? Well, when Celtic come, everyone hates it. And it's no because of the football in the park, because it wasn't like that 15-20 years ago when you lost to Celtic on the park. It has developed over the last few years, and it's a horrible atmosphere, and having to explain that to even 12, 13, 14-year-old kids, what does that song mean? You know what I mean? It's that horrible thing of, what do you do in that scenario? What is the good parent and solution?
We've talked about this before. There needs to be education. It's not just a case of going, it's just working class, or they're just tearaways. No, you need education. These young lads, the same way I did, 20 years ago, I need to be educated. You shouldn't have been singing the Hello Hello song,
but
Scott.
The education,
I needed somebody to be standing out, rather than someone sitting next to me encouraging me to do it. I needed somebody to clip me round the ear and say, look, didn't he sing that? That's a Rangers song. We're not wanting that at Tynecastle.
But in the same way that you've moved on, though, the education of the youngsters,
I would expect most of the others move on now. It will. The vast majority of folk that were singing songs and getting involved in some of the tedious stuff that happened last week, the vast majority of them are late teenagers, early 20s, who in 10 years, they'll settle down. They'll still be going to the football, but it'll come out of them. And a lot of people, it is that whole thing about 90-minute bigots. A lot of these guys are fairly harmless, in the grand scheme of things.
Ross, do you share Scott's faith in humanity? Because being honest, I'm not convinced I do. I don't believe that. I think as many of them are 40-year-old blokes as are 20-year-old blokes.
Going by my comments, especially back in the early days of Monday Night Football with the flares and stuff.
Yeah.
My point still sticks that I can't trust the average Scottish football fan to behave themselves, and that's unfortunate. They're grown men. Even if you're in your 20s or whatever, you still should know what's right and wrong, what's good to sing, what's bad to sing. I know people get caught up in the moment.
Yeah.
It's special occasions when you're playing Rangers and Celtic and stuff, but I don't. Unfortunately, I think there needs to be more police action in the Celtic end, because the way it's gone now, they're too scared to go in and grab a few people from the stand.
It's just not logistically possible.
Exactly.
As well, when you've got 3,500 of them there who refuse to sit at any point and can simply launch it, as we've seen on the YouTube videos with the stewards, and as we all saw with the naked eye at the game, where a steward had the audacity to try and get someone.
All they've got to do is identify them, take a photo of them, get them after the game.
Which, to be fair, it is happening. There are arrests happening now that weren't happening 20 years ago. You would look at these games before and you would see 10 Hearts fans arrested, no Celtic fans, and you would think, that doesn't make sense. But it was because, how do you arrest the Celtic fans logistically? It's almost impossible.
It is improving.
It is changing now.
It is improving slightly. And
do we have to? Is the big step just to cut their allocation in the same way that we did for the...
You've actually brought up an interesting point, because I would like to ask Police Scotland how they've talked about keeping the allocation for away fans at Ibrox this season to 800 because of safety reasons, but they don't consider those same safety reasons when Celtic and Rangers are going to grounds.
I have to say I'm not convinced that was Police Scotland. I think that suited Rangers at that moment in time.
Well, it won't be suiting Rangers next month. I'd imagine if they can get ready 4,000 or 5,000 tickets to us, given their financial plight, they probably should be.
We will see, but then that works on the understanding that Rangers is a well-run business who make logical and sensible decisions based on how they make money, and I'm not convinced that they may not work on the basis that an extra 4,000 Hearts fans makes a win for them more likely, and thus let's cut off our nose to spite our face and not allow them in. You never know. Right, any final point, Scott, just on the final subject, or on the final point of that last subject, do you agree that we simply have to, next time Celtic come, hopefully next season on league business, they've just got 1,200 fans?
Yeah, I mean, that's a start to it, and also, like I say, it's just got to be, I talked about self-policing on my blog, and I've seen it in some away games. There was one match a few years back at Kilmarnock where there was a few Rangers wannabes sitting in our end, and a few guys actually ejected about themselves, so, more of that we need to see. If you do happen to sit next to somebody who does start getting into that song, just, it's not a case of embarrassing them, it's just a case of saying, look, just didn't do it, just think about it. We've got so much of our own sort of songbook that we could be singing. Just try and stray away from, like I say, they're not going to harm anyone really, but
It may harm the club, because
Exactly.
eventually it will come to this thing where if Hearts are going to put their head above the parapet and and Budge is going to single that out, then the authorities will have to start to act on those things if Hearts are still guilty of them. So we will have to.
That's the thing. From a Hearts perspective. She did bring it to light about the old chair smashing thing. Now Hearts fans have been guilty of doing that at Easter Road, so I hope she's going to remember that in a few months' time when naturally there probably will be a couple of broken chairs at Easter Road and Hibs decide to bring up.
That is why it's a good thing that she's done it as well, because it now does bring it to light from a Hearts perspective that we can't do that stuff anymore, and because a chairman or a chairwoman in this scenario has been brave enough to say, I'm going to try and implement a different image and a different vision for my club and what we are going to stand for, it is a case that we are now better equipped to self-police, and that if you see someone smashing a chair at Easter Road, you're able to turn around and are you serious? Are you that brainless that it doesn't go through your head that this is going to come back on the club? And it really sets up that it gives us a pedestal to really self-police from here, because we know that it's not just what we want as football fans, it's what the club wants, and they've pretty much given us an agenda to go out and self-police, which you get into a side where that could be dangerous for the normal supporter to try and do that, but obviously the strength in numbers, obviously if the sensible fans outnumber the morons, hopefully. Ross, you've got a final point before we wrap up?
Yeah, it's just a really positive one. I know we're going to go on like a half-year review and we're going to say who's good, who's bad, but someone I need to point out has been man of the year for me so far is the individual who decided to pay for advertisement boards behind the Tynecastle goals this season, because if he's not been promoted to the chairman of that company, I don't know what else he'll be doing in that company now.
Why is that such a positive for you?
Well, I think everyone's seen the name of that company on the TV. I don't know how many times now where the goals are flying in, so yeah, shout out to that guy.
It's rare that the Blazers in any organisation are given applause.
It's like Annan Builders or something like that.
Get him working for the SPL, he might be able to get us a sponsor.
One final point then on that subject. Barry Hearn has been spoken about so much this week. Ultimately, he was very good at creating soundbite.
He is.
Is anything going to change?
No, we shouldn't be listening to him. I'm sorry, but you can't compare the atmosphere at a darts match to try to pull in fans to watch Hearts play the same team 4 times a season. It's a totally different scenario. Why they even had him in discussing it, God only knows.
But then that does call on his other point, though, in that you need to actually engage with the fans as to what they want.
So engage with the fans, not Barry Hearns.
No, but that's correct. But then that's not his fault that they've asked him to go there. And in actual fact, he managed to encapsulate a lot of what we've been saying.
It did bring publicity to it.
It is an annoyance from a fan's perspective that you think it takes someone like that to come in and say these things that we've been saying, and when they've come out and surveyed us for years and years, we've been saying the same things about, well, ultimately it doesn't matter if Hearts are rubbish and Hibs are rubbish, I'll still pay to go and see Hearts and Hibs because it's still Hearts and Hibs. And the same, that he said in terms of 2 donkeys racing, it's still exciting to see which one of them wins. From that perspective, I think he's said a lot of sense, but nothing groundbreaking, and for it to have been treated in the way like it has is a bit of a slap in the face for everyone, because you're right, the fans have been clear that we want to see us playing each other less.
Yes. We want a bigger league. We want,
games to mean
better infrastructure in terms of the youth setup, a return to the reserve leagues, stuff like that, stuff that will get fans back on side. Talking about the drink element is just, it's such a small issue for me.
Yeah.
If fans are still be wanting to go to the pubs, and the thing is, what will happen is you'll start drinking at the games, and then you'll have all the local businesses going bust. There's plenty of pubs round about Tynecastle, I know, that would certainly go to the wall if they didn't have the trade that was coming in every second Saturday.
The funny thing is, as well, is that it does turn a blind eye to the fact that most of these things exist anyway. The Gorgie Club exists at Tynecastle, that you can go, you can drink almost right up to kick-off, and then, it's not as easy as going to the concourse and drinking, but nowadays, how many folk really go for a pie at half-time anyway, because you miss 10 minutes of the game? Yeah. So it is, yes, it is an issue, but I think the biggest thing there is that there's a disparity between us and England, and people look at that and think that's ridiculous, because you're almost categorising Scottish people as being incapable of dealing with drink, or not normal human beings, and that they can't rationalise I probably shouldn't have 8 pints at half time in the football, because ultimately, I've been to Anfield dozens of times now, you can't drink in view of the pitch anyway. So the whole time you're drinking, you're just standing randomly on a concourse as people bang past you trying to get to the toilets or trying to get to their seats. It's not really an enjoyable experience to be drinking there anyway. The novelty wears off pretty quickly. So I think you're right, it's kind of hidden behind that, but that's again the fault of the Blazers in that they've chosen to concentrate on what suits them.
I think he's read fans forums basically before he made that comment, because he's said everything that everyone's been talking about and nothing more. There's not like anything, as you say, groundbreaking, something that he maybe can see that can improve somewhere. So yeah, I mean, what he said, fair enough, but nothing's going to happen. So.
But do you think the idea that he has simply read fans forums and yet garnered so much media attention and so much praise from a lot of individuals, do you not think that isolates how easy Neil Doncaster's job is if he actually boiled it down to the simplicity of it?
I could do Neil Doncaster's job in 2 seconds.
They're just box tickers, they're not football men. This is the problem.
Well, it's funny because you say football men, but in actual fact, I don't necessarily think getting guys from Scottish football would help, because they are part of the problem. But what you need is an actual businessman. You need a salesman.
But when I say football men, even people for the media could. I mean, even somebody like, you know, guys that work on sports, you know, Stuart Cosgrove could sit there, you know, and run the place a hell of a lot better.
The positives of Scottish football.
Exactly. So that's what I meant by football men. Yeah, maybe not so much ex-pros and that, but yeah, I mean, Neil Doncaster, he's just he looks like he should be working for the HMRC. He shouldn't be running Scottish football.
Yeah, the sooner he's out the better. Like,
yeah.
Okay, on that friendly, positive note, we know how to solve Scottish football's problems, it's just no one's asking us. But that's probably what most fans are thinking, and you know what, it's probably true.
Yep.
we do, because ultimately it's us that pay the wages, it's us that they're trying to attract along, and they're just not doing a very good job of it at the moment. But Edinburgh football is thriving. As we've said, we set back for the Hibs at the weekend, but they'll be back to winning ways this week at Easter Road against Alloa. Hearts will continue the winning run at Central Park against Cowdenbeath, and we'll be back flying. And after Rangers surrender meekly at Palmerston, the race will be on for Hibs to catch them and Hearts to run away with the title. Agreed?
Yes.
Absolutely.
We're positive here, don't let anyone tell you anything different. Thanks for joining us again. Get in touch on the Facebook and the Twitter. This has been Monday Night Football. Thanks very much for your time, guys.
Cheers.